The kitchen was silent that night. Too silent. The only sound filling the house was the low hum of the pot simmering on the stove and the old clock in the living room ticking away the seconds with an almost cruel slowness. I stirred the sauce distractedly while watching the steam rise slowly, as if even it were tired of being there. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Again. Ricardo had sent another short, cold, automatic message. "I'll be late. Don't wait up for me." It was always like this. No explanations. No affection. Without that small care that transforms a marriage into a home. Over time, his absence ceased to be an event, and became routine. I looked at the set table. 2 plates. 2 glasses. The small candles that I still insisted on lighting, perhaps out of stubbornness, or hope. But the food cooled slowly, just like everything between us. The food cooled on the table, just like our marriage. I whispered that myself without realizing it, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. You know when a house seems too big for just one person? That's how it was every night. At the beginning of our marriage, Ricardo would arrive early. He'd sit with me in the kitchen, steal pieces of cheese while I cooked, hug me from behind, and say that the smell of the food mixed with my perfume was the best part of his day. Small things. Small gestures. But it was precisely these small things that made everything seem alive. Now, only silence remained. I picked up my phone again. No new messages. No calls. Nothing. For a moment, I thought about calling him. Asking where he was. Asking if he still remembered that someone was waiting at home. But I gave up before even unlocking the screen. I already knew the cold answers, the tired tone, the irritation hidden behind the words. So I just turned off the stove. The kitchen plunged into an even heavier silence. I rested my hands on the sink and closed my eyes for a few seconds. The tiredness wasn't physical. It was emotional. It was that kind of emptiness that grows slowly inside you, almost without you noticing, until it occupies all the spaces. And the worst part? I still loved my husband. Or at least, I loved who he used to be. I walked slowly through the house while the yellowish lights created soft shadows on the walls. Everything seemed frozen in time. The photos from our wedding were still on the living room shelf. The two of us smiling on the beach. Young. In love. Full of plans. Sometimes I wondered when we stopped looking at each other that way. Does love end suddenly? Or does it simply fade away little by little, until no one notices anymore? I sat on the sofa, hugging a cushion to my chest. Outside, the rain began to fall slowly, gently pattering against the windows. And for the first time that night, I felt like crying. Not out of anger. Not out of jealousy. But because I was tired of feeling invisible in my own home. The rain continued to fall outside when I heard 3 soft knocks on the front door. I was immediately surprised. Almost no one showed up at that house unannounced, especially at that time of night. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked slowly down the hallway, feeling a slight tightness in my chest. Maybe it was Ricardo forgetting his keys again. Or some neighbor. But when I opened the door, I froze for a moment. Aunt Helena? The voice came accompanied by a shy, familiar smile. Lucas. My nephew. It had been at least 4 years since I last saw him in person. The tall, thin boy who used to run around my mother's house now seemed like a completely different man. Older. More confident. His hair a little messy from the light rain, and that same gentle look from when he was a teenager. My God. Lucas. He opened his arms before I even finished the sentence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt someone truly hugging me. Sorry for showing up like this out of nowhere, he said, letting out a light laugh. I was passing through town, and I thought I'd surprise you. For some reason, my eyes welled up. Maybe because it had been a long time since anyone had come wanting to see me simply because they missed me. I stepped back to let him in. You're soaked. Come in quickly before you catch pneumonia. Lucas entered, looking around the house with evident nostalgia. His smile seemed to illuminate the silent rooms in a strange yet welcoming way. And then something simple happened, but it deeply moved me. He took a deep breath and smiled. It still smells like you're cooking. I thought I'd never smell that again. I chuckled softly, almost unconsciously. When he entered the kitchen smiling, it felt like the house had a soul again. That phrase silently pierced my heart. I went back to the kitchen while he followed me, observing everything as if revisiting an important part of his own life. "Do you still make that cheese sauce?" he asked excitedly. "Do you still remember that?" How could I forget? It was practically my entire childhood. For the first time in months, I heard laughter in that kitchen. Real laughter. Lucas sat on the counter while I reheated dinner. And suddenly, the heavy silence of that house began to gradually disappear, replaced by light conversations, old memories, and silly little stories. He talked about college, about the cities where he had lived in recent years, about jobs that had gone wrong and dreams he still wanted to fulfill. And I just listened, smiling more than he usually had lately. "Do you still cook when you're sad?" he asked suddenly. I paused for a second. "What do you mean?" Lucas shrugged. "You used to. When something hurt you, you'd go to the kitchen." That answer disarmed me more than it should have. Because Ricardo never noticed it. But Lucas did, in less than an hour. I quickly looked away to hide my emotion. I guess some things never change. He observed me silently for a few seconds, as if he wanted to ask something deeper, but decided not to insist. And perhaps that's precisely what made me feel comfortable. The absence of pressure. The lightness. The rare feeling of finally being able to breathe inside my own home. Outside, the rain continued to fall slowly. But there, in that kitchen illuminated by the yellowish light of the stove, something inside me seemed to awaken after a long period of dormancy. Lucas ended up staying for dinner that night. And then for breakfast. And, without me quite realizing how, his presence began to be part of the silent routine of that house. The days seemed lighter when he was around. There was life in the hallways again. Soft music coming from the guest room. Occasional laughter. Random comments about bad TV shows. Small things, but they completely changed the atmosphere. Ricardo remained distant. He sent quick messages during the day. "Meeting. I'll be late. Don't wait for me." No questions about me. No curiosity about how I was doing. He didn't even mention Lucas staying there. And perhaps that was what hurt the most. On one of those cold nights, I was in the kitchen again making tea when I heard Lucas's footsteps approaching slowly. "You practically live in this kitchen, don't you?" he joked, leaning against the counter. I smiled slightly. "I think it's the only place in the house that still calms me down." He watched me silently as I poured water into the cups. Lucas had that rare kind of quiet attention. He didn't interrupt. He didn't force answers. He just truly listened. And that was dangerous. Because when someone finally listens to us, we start talking about things we've spent years hiding. "You seem tired, Aunt Helena." The sentence came low, carefully. I paused for a few seconds before answering. "It's just stress." He raised an eyebrow slightly, as if he didn't believe me. "It doesn't seem like just that." I immediately looked away at the tea. Outside, the light rain was hitting the windows again. The clock was almost midnight, and the kitchen was lit only by the yellowish light of the stove. There was something intimate in that shared silence. Not intimate in the wrong way, but human. Comforting. As if, for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to pretend I was okay. Lucas slowly pulled up a chair and sat near the table. "Can I ask you a question?" I nodded carefully. "Are you happy?" That question pierced my chest cruelly. Because no one had asked me that in years. Not my husband. Not my family. Not even myself. I let out a low laugh, without any humor. That was a tough one. "I'm sorry. I just..." "No. It's okay." Silence returned for a few seconds. Then, almost without realizing it, I started talking. About the lonely nights. About the forgotten birthdays. About the cold dinners at the table. About the constant feeling of living next to someone who no longer saw me. Lucas listened to everything without interrupting. And that moved me more than it should have. Sometimes, the worst loneliness is the one that nobody notices. My voice came out low, almost faltering at the end of the sentence. He lowered his eyes for a moment, as if he truly felt my pain. "I noticed," he replied softly. My heart tightened. Not because there was romance in that moment, but because there was care. And there's a huge difference between someone who is merely present and someone who truly notices when you're breaking inside. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotion. I think I've gotten so used to pretending everything is okay that I don't even know how to stop anymore. Lucas slowly got up and walked to the sink, grabbing the kettle before I could do anything. "Then maybe it's time someone took care of you a little too." The simplicity of that sentence almost made me cry. Because after so many years of being strong for everyone, I had forgotten what it was like to be cared for. That night, after Lucas went upstairs to the guest room, I stayed alone in the kitchen for a few more minutes, staring at the thin steam still rising from the forgotten teacup on the table. His words kept echoing in my head. "Are you happy?" It was strange how such a simple question could reopen such old wounds. I slowly leaned against the sink and closed my eyes for a moment. And, for the first time in a long time, I allowed my mind to return to places I normally avoided revisiting. The beginning of my marriage seemed to belong to another life. Ricardo was different before. Attentive. Present. He would call me during work just to ask how my day was going. He made a point of having dinner with me even when he arrived tired. On weekends, we would dance awkwardly in the kitchen while lunch burned on the stove. I truly believed we would grow old happily. But the change came slowly. Silently. First came the overtime. Then the trips. The short messages. The hurried conversations. Until one day, I realized we shared the same house, but no longer shared the same life. He was present in the house, but absent from my life. I clearly remember our 10th wedding anniversary. I spent weeks planning that night. I bought a new dress. I reserved a table at the restaurant where we had our first date. I even wrote a small letter, one of those silly and sincere ones you write when you still believe that love can be recovered. I waited for hours. Ricardo arrived close to midnight. Tired. Distracted. With his cell phone in his hand. And he didn't even remember the date. The only thing he said was, "The meeting took a long time. You should have slept." That night, I cried alone in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear. But he probably wouldn't have even noticed. There was also the day I got sick. High fever. Weakness. I could barely get out of bed. Ricardo left money on the dresser before leaving for work and said, "If it gets worse, call a doctor." Not even a kiss on the forehead. Not even a "get well soon." Nothing. And the worst part was that I kept trying to understand where I had gone wrong. Had I ceased to be interesting? Does loving someone for many years make them stop seeing you? These thoughts began to slowly consume me. Meanwhile, Lucas seemed to see details that Ricardo had ignored for years. He noticed when I pretended to be okay. When my smile was forced. When I stayed silent for too long. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes in the living room, he appeared leaning against the door, silently observing everything. "You do this all the time, don't you?" "Do what?" "Act as if everything is fine." I stopped immediately. He approached slowly. "You can tell when someone is tired of carrying everything alone." I swallowed hard. Because no one had ever said that out loud. Not my mother. Not my friends. Not the man I slept with every night. Sometimes I wondered what the exact moment was when a marriage began to die. There was no screaming. No discovered betrayal. No explosion. Just silence. Distance. Small emotional absences that accumulated until they transformed love into mere coexistence. And perhaps that was exactly what hurt the most, not having been abandoned all at once, but little by little. Very little by little. That night, as I turned off the kitchen lights, I realized something I had tried to deny for a long time. I had been emotionally alone for years. The following night, I decided to prepare a more elaborate dinner. Perhaps because Lucas's presence was awakening a version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. The woman who liked to cook listening to soft music. Who carefully set the table. Who still tried to transform simple moments into something special. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the kitchen while Lucas distractedly fiddled with his cell phone, sitting near the counter. "You still cook better than any restaurant in this country," he joked. I smiled, shaking my head. "You exaggerate too much." "I don't exaggerate. My mother says the same thing." When he mentioned my sister, I felt a slight pang of longing. It had been weeks since I'd spoken to almost anyone in the family. Little by little, I drifted away from everyone without realizing it. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe I started disappearing first. We sat down to dinner shortly after. For the first time in a long time, the table didn't seem empty. There was conversation. Occasional laughter. The sound of cutlery mixed with the soft music coming from the living room. And then, in the middle of a random sentence, everything changed. "To be honest, I almost didn't come." I looked up immediately. "What do you mean?" Lucas hesitated. For the first time since he arrived, he seemed uncomfortable. "Nothing much." "Lucas." He slowly put down his fork. "It's just, the family is worried about you." My chest tightened. "Worried about me, why?" The silence that followed was too heavy. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, clearly regretting having brought up the subject. "Sometimes, at family lunches, your name comes up." I felt a heat rise in my face. "What do they say?" He hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "That you've been sad lately. That you've disappeared from everyone's lives. That your marriage seems strange." Those words hit me like a punch. Because I truly believed I was hiding everything very well. I looked away at the almost untouched plate in front of me. "So it's become the talk of the whole family?" "Not in that way, but it's become the talk of the town." My voice came out more bitter than I intended. Lucas took a deep breath. "They're not judging you." I let out a short, hurt laugh. You don't need to judge someone when their sadness is already etched on their face. Silence returned immediately. Outside, the rain began again, beating against the kitchen windows as if matching the weight of that moment. And then I realized something that destroyed me inside. Everyone could see my sadness. Except the man sleeping beside me. My own family had noticed my tiredness. My absence. My empty gaze. But Ricardo hadn't. Or perhaps he had noticed, and simply stopped caring. I felt my eyes welling up and immediately turned my face away, ashamed. I hated crying in front of others. Lucas lowered his voice. "Aunt Helena, I didn't mean to hurt you." I shook my head slowly. "It wasn't you." And it hadn't been. The pain didn't come from his words. It came from the silent humiliation of discovering that my unhappiness was already visible to everyone around me. Except for the only person who should have known it better than anyone else. Lucas was silent for a few seconds before speaking again. "You know what the problem is?" I looked at him without answering. "You spent so much time trying to appear strong, that no one noticed how tired you were." That sentence pierced my chest in an almost cruel way. Because it was true. I had spent years trying to save a marriage alone. Smiling when I wanted to cry. Waiting when I was already empty. Pretending that love still existed where only distance remained. And for the first time, I began to wonder how much of myself I had lost trying to keep everything afloat. After that conversation at dinner, something inside me changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no shouting, no immediate tears. It was worse. It was silent. Like a small crack slowly appearing in a wall that had been fragile for years. That night, I stayed awake long after Lucas went upstairs to the bedroom. The house was dark, except for the dim kitchen light I had unknowingly left on. The clock showed almost 2 in the morning, but sleep seemed impossible. His words kept coming back. "You spent so much time trying to appear strong. That no one noticed how tired you were." I sat on the sofa, hugging a thin blanket to my body while the rain fell outside at a steady melancholic pace. And for the first time in a long time, I began to ask questions I had avoided for years. When did I start accepting so little? When did silence become normal? And the worst of all, Could seeking comfort also be considered betrayal? I closed my eyes immediately after that thought, almost scared of myself. Because Lucas hadn't done anything wrong. He didn't cross any boundaries. He didn't insinuate anything. He didn't look at me inappropriately. All that existed between us was care. Listening. Presence. But perhaps that was precisely what made everything so confusing. I had been emotionally starved for so long that any gesture of attention seemed too much. The next morning, I woke up early trying to push those thoughts away. I went to the kitchen before sunrise, seeking comfort in the usual routine. Freshly brewed coffee. Bread in the pan. The low sound of the kettle heating. Simple things. Safe things. But Lucas appeared a few minutes later, still sleepy, his hair messy and a tranquil expression on his face. "Do you sleep at all or live in this kitchen?" he asked with a light laugh. I smiled slightly. "I think the kitchen has become my favorite hiding place." He absent-mindedly opened the refrigerator. "Then I'll start charging rent." I ended up laughing for real. And that scared me. Because it had been a long time since a laugh had come out so naturally. Lucas noticed. "It was good to hear that." "Hear what?" "You laughing." I immediately looked away at the cup in my hands. My heart started to clench again. Guilt always came after the light-hearted moments. As if some part of me insisted on reminding me that I was still married. Even feeling alone. Even being ignored for years. I spent the rest of the morning fighting my own thoughts. Trying to convince myself that it was just emotional neediness. That I was confusing affection with something bigger simply because I no longer remembered what it was like to receive attention. But deep down, I knew there was something more painful hidden there. I didn't feel guilty for falling in love. Because I wasn't. I felt guilty for realizing how much I needed to be heard. For realizing how much a little kindness could dismantle someone emotionally abandoned. That afternoon, while folding clothes in the laundry room, I watched Lucas through the window talking to a neighbor outside. He laughed easily. He seemed light. Present. And then a cruel realization struck me. I had begun to feel more alive in my nephew's company than beside my own husband. I immediately lowered my eyes, ashamed of the mere thought. Because there were truths that one could barely admit to oneself. And that was one of them. Ricardo returned on a Thursday night. Without warning. I was in the kitchen again, as almost always, finishing dinner while Lucas organized some old boxes in the living room. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft music coming from the radio and the smell of freshly prepared food. Then I heard the front door open. My whole body froze. The heavy footsteps. The sound of the keys on the table. The strange silence that followed. Ricardo had arrived. I glanced quickly at Lucas, who also remained motionless for a moment. And then my husband appeared in the kitchen doorway. Tired. Serious. Still with his suitcase in hand. His eyes passed over me, and then over Lucas. "Ah," was all he said. Just that. No hug. No longing. No, "I missed you." Just an "ah." My chest tightened immediately. Lucas stood up politely. "Good evening, Uncle Ricardo." "You've grown up," he replied dryly, dropping his suitcase near the wall. The atmosphere became heavy almost instantly. I tried to act normally. "You should have let us know you were arriving today." Ricardo loosened his tie without even looking at me. "They decided to cancel tomorrow's meeting." That automatic, cold, professional response seemed to perfectly summarize the man he had become within that house. Lucas noticed. Of course he noticed. And perhaps that bothered me even more. "I'll go upstairs and leave you two to talk," he said carefully, sensing the tension in the air. As soon as he disappeared down the hallway, silence fell over the kitchen like a storm about to explode. Ricardo opened the refrigerator distractedly. "So, how long will he be here?" The question came in a strange tone. Too dry. I slowly closed the drawer I was organizing. "I don't know yet." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Interesting." I looked at him immediately. "What does that mean?" Ricardo finally looked up. "Nothing." I just found it curious that you seemed so cheerful lately. My heart raced. After years of not noticing absolutely anything, he finally perceived some change. But too late. Maybe because someone in this house is finally talking to me. The sentence slipped out before I could control it. Ricardo fell silent. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look away. Years of frustration began to rise in my throat at the same time. Do you have any idea how many nights I've eaten dinner alone in this kitchen? He sighed heavily. Helena, I work to maintain this house. And I spent years trying to keep our marriage alive on my own. The tension between us became suffocating. Ricardo ran a hand over his face, clearly irritated. So that's it? You're going to turn your nephew's visit into a marital crisis? I shook my head slowly, feeling my eyes welling up. No. The crisis already existed long before he arrived. The silence that followed was brutal. Because we both knew it was true. My voice came out lower afterward. More tired. More honest. You only realized you were losing me when someone started listening to me. Ricardo finally seemed to feel the weight of that sentence. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. Perhaps because there was no possible defense against years of emotional absence. Tears began to stream down my face before I could stop them. I waited for you for years, Ricardo. My voice faltered. I waited for you to come home. Come back to our lives. Come back to me. He lowered his eyes for the first time. And in that instant I realized something painful. I wasn't fighting because I hated my husband. I was fighting because there was still a part of me that suffered from loving someone who had been emotionally gone for a long time. Ricardo remained motionless in the middle of the kitchen while the silence grew again between us. But this time, it wasn't an empty silence. It was the sound of a truth that had finally been spoken. After that night, a lot changed inside me. Not because my marriage ended immediately. Not because a new love appeared. And not because suddenly, all the answers became clear. The truth is that some pains don't disappear all at once. They simply cease to be ignored. Lucas stayed in town for just a few more days. Then he left in the same unexpected way he arrived. But before leaving, he hugged me tightly and said something I'll never forget. You deserve to be heard too, Aunt Helena. It was simple. But perhaps no one had said that to me in years. After he left, the house became silent again. The sound of footsteps disappeared from the hallways. The soft music ceased. And the kitchen became just a kitchen again. But I was no longer the same woman. Because sometimes, it only takes someone to see our sadness for a few days. For us to realize how many years we've spent living emotionally invisible. Ricardo and I still had many difficult conversations after that night. Some calm, others painful. For the first time in a long time, we stopped pretending everything was okay. And that's scary. Because the truth usually comes accompanied by losses. But also by liberation. For a long time, I thought betrayal only began when someone crossed certain boundaries. When another person appeared. Another touch. Another feeling. Today I'm not so sure. I think some betrayals begin long before that. They begin in silence. In absence. In small daily oversights. In I'll be late. In we'll talk later. In feelings ignored until they turn into loneliness. And perhaps the worst part of emotional neediness is that it doesn't make a sound. It grows quietly, slowly, until one day someone shows the slightest care. And your heart no longer knows how to react. Tell me, does a heart ignored for years still know the difference between neediness and love? I spent a lot of time blaming myself for needing attention. For needing to be heard. For feeling relief when someone finally noticed my pain. But today I understand something important. No one should beg to be seen within their own marriage. No one should feel alone next to the person who promised to stay. And perhaps that's why so many people get lost emotionally without realizing it. Not because they stopped loving, but because they spent too much time surviving the emptiness. I still don't know exactly what the future of my marriage will be. Perhaps some stories can be rebuilt. Perhaps others will simply teach lessons before ending. But one thing I've learned, love doesn't only die in big fights. Sometimes it fades silently, while two people pretend they're still together. And perhaps the real question was never, who was wrong first? But rather, at what point did we stop caring for each other? And you, what do you think about this?